This is your home for St. Cloud State hockey, keeping you up to date on the NCHC.
One-timer coming, they score! Ripped in! A bomb from Pervix!
Women's WCHA.
So Dana Rasmussen fires and she scores! Dana Rasmussen for the Huskies alongside
The National Hockey League.
Dwayne Kaprizov in for a chance to win it! He scores! Kirill, the thrill is for real! Welcome to the NHL, a game winner!
And everything from the state of hockey.
St. Cloud Cathedral is now 42.6 seconds away from wrapping up the school's first ever title.
Welcome to the Huskies Warming House Podcast Den. Welcome into the Huskies Warming House Podcast, episode 162 here in the Den. Nick, Max, and Noah Grant here to bring you this week's episode, recording on Monday, May 15th, just after 8 o'clock in the evening. We are right in the middle of the Dallas Stars-Seattle Kraken game. So, of course, they will be, in some ways, part of our extra ice session, essentially. We're going to try to take as best of a look as we can into the third round, the conference finals for the NHL playoffs. Soon there will be only 4 teams by the time this show comes out on Tuesday. So, and it's interesting, we'll get to this a little bit later, but in the East, at least, I believe it would only be the second Stanley Cup final appearance for either of those clubs, whichever one makes it out of
it would be, yes,
the conference final. Of course, Carolina 1-for-1 in their appearances, and Florida yet to win a Stanley Cup final game in their franchise history. So,
been a while since they've been back, 27 years, but
yeah, no kidding. Yeah, what a year though. 96, can't go wrong, right? Although maybe my parents did. That's another story.
Oh God.
With that being said, though, of course, other things we're going to talk about: a very abbreviated Huskies Illustrated Weekly Roundup. We're going to talk a little bit about some NCAA player moves. The Huskies actually making a couple more transfer additions this week as well. The USHL playoffs wrapping up in the next week and a half. The Fargo Force in a dogfight, to say the least, for them. So we'll keep an eye on that. NHL playoff recap for the second round. Some more NHL awards as well coming out. So we'll touch on 3 more finalist groups that come out. And then kind of our big topic that we're going to follow in conjunction with the NHL playoffs here. The men's worlds have been underway and they've brought some really good hockey, actually. So
they have, yes.
Pretty good tournament to watch so far. So we start, as always, with Center Ice View News and Notes in the Huskies Illustrated Weekly Roundup. Center Ice View News and Notes. Center Ice View provides you with the best coverage of St. Cloud State Huskies hockey, from game notes, recaps, photos, and more. Go to centericeview.com.
Illustrated Weekly Roundup here, Noah, and I'm going to throw a curveball in on you first because I know we have a couple of things to talk about, but tomorrow's a big day for the game of hockey and the NHL. Do you remember what that day is, Noah?
Yeah, it will be the Tempe voting.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, so it's mail-in drop-in ballots. Apparently, so far, the responses have been, I guess, quite positive in terms of the numbers. Again, we don't know. There isn't really any early release of the results, but the last date of vote is tomorrow. So the 16th is when the cutoff time, which means more than likely, with 36 to 48 hours, we may have either some really good news for the NHL and the city of Tempe, or some really, really bad news for both the NHL and the Arizona Coyotes, right? As they
not that that's ever happened for that franchise.
No. And if you're Glendale, I wonder if you can only vote once. Let's see. So
throw Phoenix in that mix too.
No, not at all. Can you imagine just like suitcases of dropped ballots? It hasn't happened in Arizona too, by the way, in other elections.
You sound like a certain political party in an election a couple years ago. But anyway,
still an election anyway. So on to real news that is, not the fake or alternative news. And this actually, speaking of teams and their futures, how about this? We've been talking the past couple of weeks, Noah, about how the Ottawa Senators have generated more, shall we say, celebrity interest in purchasing the team, right? And a name that we've talked about more than enough has been Ryan Reynolds. Now, apparently, he's out. And this is a bit of a surprise, right? I guess that he negotiated or was trying to negotiate an exclusive window to finalize the deal, and essentially it was declined. I'm sure it was probably a judge's ruling or whatever it was. So the deadline for any interested party to file a bid was today on Monday, and apparently Ryan Reynolds and his group will no longer be in the fold. So that leaves us with the Weeknd, and then another group that's got Snoop Dogg in the mix. From what we know, still a lot of interest there, but you kind of wonder with Ryan Reynolds again, very big advocate for the game of hockey. Whether that has an impact on anything, it probably won't. But
yeah,
NHL marketing, they're probably like, damn it, and they're probably scratching out a few ideas. So
yeah, I mean, I think he's, in some ways maybe the safest option, just kind of known commodity with ownership before. I think, I mean, the Ottawa Senators are valued at just over $800 million, and his offer was just north of $1 billion. So kind of curious to see that unfolded the way that it did. It sounds like that group kind of wanted to make a push to be the group, though, and really kind of finalize that deal, kind of like an under the table backdoor kind of thing.
That's not going to work.
And I think for the NHL and the Ottawa Senators, and maybe neither group anticipated this, including maybe Ryan Reynolds' group, the anticipation of how much interest and how much celebrity notoriety this is getting. I mean, like we talked about, this is going to be a great problem for the NHL and the Senators, and of course the Melnyk family, who is going to move on from this organization. But a lot of May 16th apparently is an important day for a variety of reasons. Let's just put it that way. So.
Yeah, very much so. So we'll keep everybody up to date, of course, once we know whether the other two groups did formally submit a bid, and ultimately who wins that bid and who will become the next owner of the Ottawa Senators.
And the other thing too, just to throw it out really quickly, they might not be the only two bids here. We might have another one that's laying in there that we have no idea. So
yeah, I mean, the Washington Commanders got sold, so there's that. So
they should be torn down, but that's another conversation.
Well, I think you got to wonder too, and aside, small tangent there, I would think the new ownership probably has their eyes set to tear down FedEx Field more, as quickly as they can. It's a literally spilling crap, not literally and figuratively. Speaking of
that's what I was going to say, though. I was like, would you rather play at Mullet Arena for 10 years or play at FedEx Field for one season? Like, actual question.
Oh boy. The fact that I'm even contemplating this tells you something. No, it's definitely Mullet Arena, because at least it's new and it's not, I've got leak problems. Anyway, speaking of leaks, what did leak out earlier this week was that the Philadelphia Flyers have, shall we say, hired some front office folks, one being a former broadcaster and, shall we say, former Philadelphia Flyer player himself. That's Keith Jones. He is the new president of hockey operations, and in a surprise to nobody, they did remove the interim tag for now official GM Daniel Briere to be the now permanent general manager for Philadelphia this coming again last Thursday. I like the moves. There's been a lot of raves about Daniel Briere when he took over as interim GM. He's got a tough job ahead of him. Let's put it slightly. But Keith Jones, a guy that didn't have, shall we say, the most illustrious NHL career, but really brought a name to himself in the broadcast world. He knows the game of hockey, great communicator, president of hockey operations. This is a great fit, I think, for the Philadelphia Flyers. He spent the majority of his career with the Flyers as a player. So this is good. And again, now that they're on the clock, right? They got the draft coming up here in a couple of weeks, and they're going to have to start rebuilding a franchise that, quite frankly, Wild general manager pretty much blew the blank up. So lots of work to do, and they definitely have their hands full.
The only negative thing to come out of this is that all the network affiliates lose a really good analyst of the game, right? I mean, Keith Jones has been a main staple in a broadcast booth. I think just what he has brought to the table, the way that he's able to articulate the game, and his delivery, as a color commentator especially, is very kind of meat and potatoes, straight to the point, things that you would want to know about the game of hockey. And he makes it palatable for people that, one, know the game, but two, people that also don't know the game, and a great ambassador for the sport. So very curious to see how he performs in this role. Of course, we've seen moves like this before, speaking with the aforementioned Ottawa Senators and Pierre McGuire, who has fallen off the face of the earth apparently. But I
would say that, if you want to compare, let's just say the outlooks were already not great for Pierre McGuire when he was hired in that role. I'm not trying to be personal.
I imagine the success for Keith Jones might be a little bit longer lived. I think that's fair to say.
Real quick though, because you mentioned Philadelphia. You talk about the uphill battle that they do face again in a stacked Metropolitan Division. Holy cow! So they do have a first-round pick, no second-round pick, 2/3, 2/4. So they got a lot of late round picks. They have two first-round picks next year's draft. But I mean, really, when you look at their prospect pool, when you look at their players coming to development, there's not a ton there.
I'm just surprised. Let's circle back. You mean Chuck Fletcher actually held on to his first rounder before he was canned? That's a
they probably had to lock him in a room and throw away the key to do it. But yeah, because I mean, remember, Marty Havlat and who am I missing? Who was the other in that trade? Ended up being more productive than Marty Hansel. Jones, right? Or was it
White, wasn't it?
Ryan White, yes, Ryan White. Yeah, that's right. That was the sweetener to get the first round pick.
What a sad story Marty Hansel's finish his career was, by the way, when he went to Dallas and then ended up having a bunch of those injury issues, by the way. People don't talk about that often, unfortunately.
No, because he was also injured when he was with Minnesota, right? And he actually, did he play a playoff game? Or if he did, it was one or two. I can't remember. But
he played it. I thought he played a couple, but then it's like he really basically just hardly didn't play after that year. I mean, it was interesting. Well, speaking of the Central Division, though, Nick, second to last topic here, the Chicago Blackhawks have sold $2.5 million of season tickets within hours after winning the draft lottery last week.
Watch they pick Adam Fantilli. That'd be hilarious.
Or, the other thing too is, and people have talked about this quite humorously, but it is a legitimate thing, aka Eric Lindros. Whoever is drafted by Chicago does not have to play for the Chicago Blackhawks.
True.
It is a thing.
It is a thing. I can't imagine Connor Bedard not wanting to go there. But then again, I don't know, right? But that's true. I mean, you can be drafted and say, screw you. I mean, what the most recent one probably that made was probably Jimmy Vesey, probably that made, shall we say, the most news about that situation. Again, Jimmy Vesey, former first-round pick himself, if I recall, but he's also not a generational talent. To me, they're I think they're two different personalities. But at the end of the day, right, he still has to sign the dotted line, and just because you're a draft pick doesn't mean you have to. So there is that chance. But to me, that's more, just a little bit of slight talk. I just can't see him. Plus, Chicago's got the cap space, so he can get paid whatever the heck he wants, and don't have to worry about it. So,
do you think the contracts actually still have dotted lines, or do you think that's changed?
It's a solid line now.
Why do we say that phrase? Was that like a big thing back in the 70s and 80s? Like,
so if I don't know for a fact, but if I'm gonna guess, remember this thing called a typewriter?
I have one actually.
It didn't. If you recall, that there's not a button on there for a solid line.
So you got to create your own.
Create your own with like little gaps in between. That's my guess.
Yeah. Well, they don't do their contracts with whiteout now? It doesn't look like a child took a 5-year-old crayon.
I'm sure Chuck Fletcher's contracts had a bit of whiteout on them.
And a first rounder attached to it, I'm sure.
That's on a post-it note attached to it.
Goodness. Well, last topic here, injury news. Carolina, hopefully getting some good news here. Teuvo Teravainen is likely to return at some point if that series goes deep with Carolina and Florida. Of course, he broke his hand in round 1 against the Islanders, so keep an eye on that. The big one that we've gotten news for, Gabriel Landeskog set to miss next season for sure after knee cartilage transplant. He had surgery on May 10th, already missed this season basically, and the brief playoff run, of course, due to his knee issues. He had surgery in March of the previous year, and then had another procedure in October, and was supposed to give like a 12 to 14 week timeline, be back a little after Christmas, something like that. And then all of a sudden,
never panned out. Yeah,
never panned out. Never had a chance to play. This is interesting. Yeah, well, yeah, this is why. Sorry, they're actually finding him with a sledgehammer in the parking lot. No, it's interesting. Obviously, of course, Landeskog, the captain.
Circumvention. That's not the same thing.
Well, it sounds like they're doing. I was going to say a knee circumcision, but anyway. With that being said, like the captain of this hockey team, right? Not only is it a question mark for Colorado, who can definitely use him in the top 9. Will he ever play again?
That is the question, right? Because I'm trying to remember, was it Mark Mathot that he said that he had either the same or a similar procedure, and it's just because of the nature of the cartilage in the knee, right? It's basically the buffer in between the knee bones, right? Your femur / your tibia fibia. I'm #not doctor advice, and I'm sure someone who ever would listen to this would actually be killing me right now for saying probably all the wrong things, but it's basically what it is, right? So when you have this type of surgery, apparently it's just the success rate isn't quite certain in terms of the, shall we say, long-term longevity of it. I think maybe that's the best way to describe it. And like anything in medicine, right, it's every case is unique, every case is different, and there is a question mark on whether he will play NHL hockey again. And the question that's floated out there, Noah, maybe you were getting to this, is what does Colorado do in this situation? Well, you already know you've got to find a replacement, and I think it's hard to say. I mean,
the danger is in finding a replacement. It's finding a replacement and then finding out that Landeskog is ready to go after next season. And then suddenly you're in a position where now let's say Gustav Nyquist, for example. Let's say Gustav Nyquist commands $6.5 million. Colorado signed a
1-year deal.
Yeah, but let's say they sign him for $2 million, and then all of a sudden Landeskog is back. Now you've got to find a way to shed.
Yeah, it's not a great situation to be in if you're the Avalanche GM, but I think you have to only worry about this year. I mean, it's kind of weird because GMs, you're brought up to think, okay, I've got to look at 2 to 3 years in advance and signing contracts. But in this situation where there's still so much unknown, you probably have to look at it and in the prism that, well, this is what I do know. We know that at least for the whole year next year he's out. So maybe you find somebody to go on a 1-year contract. Maybe Nazem Kadri. Oh, nope, he's on a long-term deal with Calgary. That didn't happen. But do you find somebody that's willing to take a 1-year deal, and maybe do you overpay for somebody in that way? So that's the other warrior, right? Is that now you're trying to fill in essentially a top 6 role, right? Because he was part of that group. He's a very great dynamic offensive player that's got a unique mix of both skill, size, and shall we say offensive creativity. So it's a tough situation, but I think you got to play the short game if you can. Mind you, you almost always overpay in a situation like that, but it's better to have a serviceable body, and they're maybe slightly overpriced than not. So I think that's what you have to look at. This is kind of one of those weird years where you find somebody, you try to, shall we say, fill the void and see what you can do after that.
Well, the Avs have to feel good about the fact that they did it for a season already, right? They know the formula in some senses, and they were still a great hockey team this season, despite a slew of injuries, not just Landeskog, a lot of players getting hurt.
A lot of players,
So, it'll be interesting, of course. They are out of the playoffs, bested by the Kraken, who are still alive as of 8:30 here tonight. We'll have to see how that pans out as we go through into the main portion of the show. And welcome into the main portion of the show, episode 162 here in the den. Nick Max and Noah Grant here to bring you all the latest in the hockey world here. And why don't we start in the great state of North Dakota here, Nick? Fargo dropped game 2 in overtime. They actually dropped both at home in the best of 5 Clark Cup championship. First game was a 4-1 loss, and that 2-1 overtime finish. Fargo was arguably the better offensive team in that hockey game. Youngstown found a way, though. That's just what good teams do. And when you're trying to solve the best team in the USHL, that's how you do it, is you have to hang around in hockey games. This series is now headed back. The Force need to win 3 straight to pull it off. This weekend, Friday, Saturday, May 19th and 20th, is in Youngstown, Ohio. Should it get to a game 5, it'll be Tuesday, May 23rd in Fargo, winner take all. So the Force definitely have an uphill battle, to say the least. I don't know if you saw the photo by chance, though. There's a big photo of Leo Gruba, by the way, St. Cloud State commit, laying an absolutely thunderous hit at open ice. Yeah, no, it was pretty incredible. So, wishing the Force the best of luck. Love to see Nick Oliver's squad pull it off. I still think they have it in them, but no margin for error, obviously. So, but unlike the Toronto Maple Leafs, people support them. With that being said, why don't we move over to some college hockey news? NCAA player moves here. On the men's side, only one to really talk about. Max Veach was absolutely giddy about this one. Minnesota Duluth.
He's been giddy about it for over 3 months privately. So
Aaron Pionk, who of course his brother Neil played at Duluth as well for 2 seasons, was originally a Mankato commit. His younger brother, Aaron, a Hermantown High School grad in 2021, played for the Wilderness and the Null, who, of course, are in the Robertson Cup playoffs right now, but he's been in the USHL with Waterloo this season. 60 games, 12 goals, 24 assists for him. This is a pickup that I'm sure Duluth is excited for the hometown-ish prospect of that Hermantown brings. But if you're Max Veach and you're trying to be analytical and not talk about a referee for a change, what's going through your mind?
Nothing, because that's all he knows how to talk about is refereeing. So I don't know.
And he doesn't know how to sit close enough to his camera on MNCAA, apparently.
Not at all. Yeah, that's that's the relaxed Max Veach is.
I kind of like that though. I mean, it felt like didn't it feel like a Green Day jacket ceremony thing, like at Augusta kind of thing?
It felt like the guy that teed off at 10 o'clock in the morning and had a 7-shot lead because everybody else imploded around him. He just sat there, with a cigar and a cognac. It was just like, all right, I'll just let everybody else kill themselves.
I didn't know if you were going to say 7-shot lead or 7 shots, but either way.
Yeah, well, it's a bit of both, depending on the context. But this is actually a very good pickup for the Bulldogs. I think it's no question what Aaron Pionk is going to bring to the table. Smooth skater. Obviously, you saw with the points, 36 points during the season. He's got some offensive upside to him. Big thing is for him, again, under Scott Staal, which surprisingly last year, was not the defensive stalwart that we probably would have seen in years past. How does a group that's going to look probably remarkably different? There's going to be a lot of new faces with them. How quickly can this team assimilate amongst each other's into Scott Sandelin's system? So it's a great personnel pickup, but you kind of wonder what the growing pains are going to look like for UMD. Nonetheless, they're going to have, shall I say, another influx of skilled defensemen in the lineup. See how well he plays after, especially some key losses up front for them. They're going to need their defensemen to be stepping up because, again, Isaac Howard going to Michigan State, just one of a couple of pieces that have, shall we say, turned over with the Bulldogs, and they'll need all the help they can get. Yes, and I said that purposely.
Yeah, certainly would agree. On the women's side, the Duluth Bulldogs also losing a player, Taylor Stewart, a senior defenseman, 8 points, 4 goals, 4 assists in 39 games played. She is on her way out. Ohio State adds another, Olivia Mobley from Quinnipiac, 43 points in 40 games as a junior.
What NLI deals is Ohio giving out? Seriously,
I don't know. 28 assists for Olivia this season. I'll say it again, man. If this Buckeyes team at minimum doesn't make the Frozen Four or the championship game, I would be.
That's a fail.
Literally, I mean, they are all in
stacked
with this program. And I know, obviously, you lose some great players, especially for Team Canada, on that stage, and obviously some players that are going to go pro or have already intended to do so. But still, oh my gosh, I mean, absolutely stacked. And they lost a bunch of players that essentially you had a player with 20 games, a player with 34, but then the other 3, 5, 2, and 0 games respectively, and a combined 11, 12, 13, 14 points between the 5 of them. I mean, you're losing very little. And let's put it to you this way, Nick. Just because I am a math guy, and that I have to break math out on this show, and I'm actually doing math on this thing called a calculator, which my professor said I wouldn't ever be able to use in my life, and apparently we have them all the time now. Let's just put it to you this way, Nick. So this Buckeyes team is essentially losing 14 points, right? Mm-hmm. They are gaining 203. That would be a net gain of 189 points. I don't know if that's good, but it certainly doesn't sound bad.
Sounds like that scoreboard from Space Jam where the Monster has had this and they switched it, kind of one-sided, isn't it? That's kind of what it looks like. It looks like a blowout. But yeah, as you mentioned, Ohio State, seemingly the destination of the offseason for women's hockey, and they continue to add, and, holy cow, yikes. I think that they must have felt like they let one slip away last year, and you could maybe argue that they did a little bit, but holy cow, Ohio State looking to make amends for what they felt like they should have had a better result at the end of the year.
I mean, talk about aggressive recruiting. I mean, there's no mistake that the plan was made and it's being executed. I mean, this is
I mean, holy cow, that's insane.
Yeah, good for them, I guess. St. Cloud, by the way, adding 2 more transfers, one from RPI, one from Merrimack. Maddie Peterson, senior forward, had 29 games, 6 points, all goals to her credit for RPI last season. And then also adding Merrimack's leading scorer Katie Kaufman, senior with 36 games, had 23 points, 11 goals, 12 assists. Hopefully par for the course, going to fill in somewhere in that middle 6, I would imagine, for St. Cloud next season.
Probably.
Just because you don't know how that translates with Merrimack's strength. I believe the Huskies, if I'm not mistaken, played Merrimack this season in that holiday tournament. Am I wrong on that?
Well, now you're really making me work. Here's
Yeah,
what I'll say. How about this?
I'll take a look.
The Kaufman thing, the addition, I should say, is quite good news because, first of all, the Rink Live did a really, really nice, a piece about her decision that chose St. Cloud State, and apparently she was, heavily recruited by a bunch of other programs for her 5th year of eligibility, and mentioned essentially the Huskies' immediate turnaround. She was like, they kind of came out of nowhere, I think was her exact quote. And she was like, at Merrimack, because, and again, their record wasn't great either. And she said, we just felt like we were going to turn it around. And we thought we're going to turn around another year. And it goes, it just never happened. And she goes, and to see St. Cloud break through the way that they did and how much better they played, she goes, that was attractive. And apparently there was a campus visit involved, and it was immediately sold. So for those who are asking about the Brian Idalski effect, it's in full swing. I think, after 1 year, if you're already convincing some other high caliber players that, holy cow, this team came out of nowhere. They beat, and then Kaufman mentioned, they beat Wisconsin, they beat the Gophers. They essentially, doubled their record. They're like, that's something I want to be a part of. And, good for them because, you hope that just continues to compound, right? Because if they take another step this year, imagine some of the other, shall we say, younger student athletes that are out there looking, whether it's their first year in college or maybe have contemplated a change after next year at their current program. You start, attracting more of those skilled, folks, guys. The St. Cloud State women's team is on a trajectory that is only going up, and that's great to see.
So, for those who are curious, my memory did serve me correctly. They did play Merrimack in the second game of that holiday tournament. The Huskies win 3-1 that night. And Merrimack's only goal came from
Katie Kaufman
on the power play. So in the third period, so the Huskies winning that one. And then actually the Huskies had a pair of games early in the season against RPI as well. 5-0 and 3-2 were their victories. And the 3-2 victory was a 3-1 lead that ended up vanishing into a 1-goal lead with about 12 minutes left to play in that hockey game. So, I would imagine there was some maybe scouting going on there during those games too, and just keeping an eye on some players that obviously, made a difference and made an impact. In fact, I should have pulled out the box score to see. Taylor Larson had a goal in the second night. Maddie Peterson had a goal in the second night as well. So a couple of RPI products there as well too on this as well. So keeping an eye on that. I mean, this women's hockey team, like we talked about, they have a lot of work to do to kind of replenish some of that offense that they're going to lose just based on graduation. 8 players in the transfer portal, obviously, but they've gained 3 back, and they're looking for more to be added into that list. I wouldn't be shocked if they get to a point, and again, we don't really know much about the freshman class as of yet, but I wouldn't be shocked if we see 1, maybe 2 more players come from the transfer portal in some capacity. I think that just when you lose that many players, even when you're trying to bring in a new freshman class, knowing, 1, you have competition with those freshmen, with the transfers coming in, but then number 2, just making sure you have a good, strong lineup, best available players. If it's the right fit, I think that coaching staff is going to make it happen. Moving on to the NHL playoffs here, of course, round 2 is over. We're going to take a look at essentially recapping the second round. We will preview the third round in the extra ice session. So it's kind of a bit of a split agenda, so to speak, for us here. But as we look at the playoff bracket here in the second round, of course, Seattle, Dallas still going on tonight. Let's start in the other side of the West here. Vegas winning last night against the Oilers, and the Oilers staff and players talked about how they felt like it was kind of a failure. One of the best power plays in NHL playoff history for the Oilers that couldn't find a way in the end, especially on that major power play. I'll be honest, I was surprised this game didn't go the full distance. I know 6 is almost 7, but almost only counts in horseshoes, hand grenades, and slow dancing.
That's a mouthful.
Yeah, like I said, I had the Oilers going to the conference finals. I don't know if we underestimated this Vegas team, or maybe it just came down to the fact that Stuart Skinner was less than serviceable and Aiden Hill was serviceable enough in the end. I
think, and we overestimated the 5-on-5 capability of Edmonton. When we talk about, the power play and the special teams, I mean, how many times do we talk about it? We talked about it in the Minnesota series against Dallas, right? How that kind of failed them, and yet 5-on-5, Minnesota was the better team that just couldn't score, right? Edmonton,
Right.
it was the same way. Edmonton had a lethal power play, but yet in game 6, 0 for 1, right? And it was at a critical moment where still, I think it was a 2-goal deficit. Mind you, they cash in and at least make it 4-3. I think that third period plays out a little bit differently. And you mentioned Skinner, right? Here's what's interesting to me, and I heard this from a couple of other folks, and so I'm repeating a kind of a storyline, but when you have Jack Campbell signed at $5 million a year until 2026, 27, I believe, somewhere in that realm. And so you're paying him $5 million a year. And yeah, Stuart Skinner, 14-1-1 down the stretch. He's a rookie goaltender. It says something about the goaltender you just paid 5x5 that you didn't start game 7. I get it. It's not as simple as it sounds, and I'm not going to be the one to try to oversimplify that, more difficult equation, but it does. If you're Jack Campbell, you kind of wonder what the heck, right? Because Stuart Skinner as a rookie played great in the regular season. I do think maybe the Stanley Cup playoffs, maybe round 2 maybe he just wasn't up for it, right? And it's not to say that it was all his fault, right? I'm not putting this on him entirely, but you kind of wonder too why Jay Woodcroft and the Edmonton Oilers, when he had been pulled already twice before then, why they didn't start Jack Campbell in game 6. And again, we'll probably never know the answer to that, but at the end of the day, their 5-on-5 play just wasn't good enough. And again, when you have a Vegas team that, unfortunately, right, for their own selves, they did take quite a few penalties in the games that Edmonton won. But imagine, again, game 6, just one power play. And that was a winning formula from the get-go for the Vegas Golden Knights. If you could just keep it 5-on-5, they were the better team. And, Edmonton, it feels like they're close, but also it kind of feels like they're still farther away, right? It's a weird spot to be in.
Well, we talked about how they were kind of like, trial by fire, win by fire, right? And, there wasn't going to be this defensive juggernaut where Edmonton was going to win a 2-1 game in triple overtime, right? That just wasn't how they were going to be, winning games 6-5, 5-4. That was just kind of the way that they were going to play the game. If they would have had goaltending, I think it almost would have been no question. And I'm not saying Skinner was more than great in the first round. And I thought he was okay through the first half of that series, but it's like they just didn't get the goaltending when it counted. And unfortunately for them, that means they're out of the playoffs. So Vegas, I think it's the 4th time in 5 seasons of existence that they make the conference finals.
How about that? Huh?
Yeah. So pretty crazy. On the other side of it, Carolina beating New Jersey. This one surprised me actually with how well Carolina played, how quickly New Jersey fell off the table after having a resurgence and getting back to form with Akira Schmidt and, finding their groove in the second half of that series against the Rangers. And then besides that one game where even they win by 4 but give up 3 shorthanded goals, they just never really look like the team. They just never looked like the team this year that was in control and a great defensive team through most of the season.
No, and that was my fear, right, when we talked about the Devils before the playoffs began was, they're playing great, but as I said, their youth is a question mark for me, and it kind of showed a little bit. I think those things with Vanacek, right, he hasn't seen the playoffs, and then you go to Akira Schmidt, who also, a younger goaltender, and, kind of is a Band-Aid, and, I don't mean that, in a disrespectful way, but he came in and he kind of settled things down, but it didn't feel like it was a permanent fix, right? It felt like this was a Band-Aid. New Jersey, just the style they play, kind of run and gun. To me, they took a lot for them to come back and beat the Rangers, and I just feel like the second round they were just out of gas in the second round. That's how I saw it. Here's the thing about New Jersey, though. They have a lot of great pieces there that they are definitely going to be playoff contenders now for the next couple of years. There's no question goaltending has to be probably the number one area that they need to address this offseason, and maybe a couple of other pieces defensively. So they've got the offensive punch, but again, the playoffs, they teach you some things, right? And I think New Jersey learned some lessons. So it's good for them, but at the end of it, they just still, I think, the lack of experience for them, both especially up front and especially in net. I think that's what hurt them. And just, again, the emotional tank was done too, even in round 2 for me. I think they let it all go in round 1.
Yeah, that Carolina team is an interesting team. They have a lot of balance. I think that, there isn't an area of Carolina's game that you can say wow, they're necessarily exceptional at, but they're just a well-oiled machine where they're above average in all areas, right? It just feels like they just kind of keep the train rolling a little bit, and that is a consistent force. There's another team that actually fits that bill quite nicely, and that is the Florida Panthers on the other side. A team that just, again, too dumb to realize they should have been out of it by now. And they're a team that just has really...
Do we have to keep saying that, though?
They're just a team that has belief and plays for each other. And I think one of the things we've talked about this before, you brought up last week, the 2012 LA Kings, when you're an 8 seed or a low seed or a wild card seed, all the pressure is off of you. You're not expected to make a deep run. And sometimes it's easier to play a little bit looser. I was shocked that they got out of that round against Boston. I know people talked about what a great comeback it was. Let's be real. They were down 3-1 in that series, and they were down in the last minute 30 of game 7. I mean, it's not like they had this surge where suddenly they were dominant and suddenly they found their game and suddenly they walked all over the Bruins. They got by the skin of their teeth.
But they did it at 4-7.
Now, in the second round, they said, okay, we're going to show that we legitimately belong here, and they ruined the Maple Leafs' life. Now, let's talk about the fact that it's a game of bounces. The Maple Leafs needed game 3, lose it in overtime. They respond in game number 4, and then game 5, they lose it in overtime. Big controversial no-goal call that I'm sure everybody, of course, saw on social media. I guess the first question, I'm assuming you saw it.
A million times.
First question is, because we've had conversations about the parallax goal, both Calgary and then Minnesota, of course, against Dallas a couple of years ago, which I'm almost positive the Dallas one was definitely not in. The Calgary one, I'm a little less sold on, but still, science says no. I don't know. My profession is based on science, so maybe I'm inclined to believe it just a little bit. But the reverse camera angle they gave at the end, boy, that one was close.
And again, the question isn't just did the puck go in the net, when was the whistle blown, right? And I think that was the other part of the conversation / equation that they were trying, to sort of pick apart, right?
And it can also be the intent to blow the whistle. Just because when you hear the whistle, if the official had intent to blow the whistle before the puck is jammed in, it can be deemed no goal. Yeah.
So that one was tough because there really wasn't a very clear angle. No, I know that through social media, there's been some, shall I say, aftermath photos of one that seemed to be on the right side of that pad there. And again, the parallax angle was a question.
Yeah,
it's tough, right? And this is where, the Toronto Maple Leaf conspiracies live on. Let's put it that way. But to conclusive, right? I'm not sure what was conclusive there. And again, that's what makes this so tough. And, people who, and this is where it goes back to even to the regular season, right, Noah? And that is, the people who hate the stoppages, you and me, I know we hate them too, if we can avoid them. But this is when they matter, right? Is in a playoff game where if that goal counts, we may be still talking about this series still with Florida and Toronto. But we're not. So I don't know.
Yeah, game 7 would have been tomorrow on Tuesday. Yeah.
Right. At the end of the day, I think what's more newsworthy is guess who was held goalless in the entire series? Austin Matthews, John Tavares too, wasn't he? Because
they talked about the big 3. They said they combined for 1 goal across $33 million. I mean,
Marner. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, and Tavares too as well. And you talked about the idea too with that no goal. They showed the overhead, and the problem is because of the shadow created from the pad, you just didn't get that definitive look that you would have taken away from the parallax angle a little bit, which of course the parallax angle from that reverse or broadcast or opposite the broadcast side feed, essentially that reverse angle camera from the bench side, looked to be the most definitive where that puck was in the net. Like I said, I don't doubt, especially the way that Riley reacted right in front of the net. I don't doubt that puck probably could have crossed the line, but I think just because of the fact that it was so inconclusive, was a little bit difficult. And I understand the NHL, a game of inches, could have been a difference maker. Some series swing on that. But we talked about this before. The Maple Leafs put themselves in that position. Credit Florida. I am extremely curious to see how this Carolina-Florida matchup matches up.
In interesting series.
In the Southeast. And here's the thing that I think is great for the game of hockey. If Toronto would have made it, it would have been cool too. But When is the last time you've legitimately talked about Florida and Carolina and said there's intrigue in the National Hockey League about these two teams? I mean, it's hard to generate interest sometimes for those programs, and they're doing it.
So, let's flip the equation here. The bunch of jerks, right? They were getting literally laughed at, meaning the Carolina Hurricanes fan base by Don Cherry, who, let's be honest, also not long after is no longer a broadcaster for some different reasons, which we will not discuss on the show. But at the end of the day, they have sort of rallied around this squad, and, they've been a very good team the last 3-4 years, right? Florida, I know that we've talked about them just in their playoff realm per se, right? But we got to remember too, Florida was expected to be better this year. Florida was expected to be, and then all of a sudden the expectations came down because they had a really slow start. Right. Almost like they should be better kind of words, right? Mm-hmm. And then they never really sort of had that come to Jesus moment, if you want to say, and like really found their game and really kind of exploded. Right. And put together a long winning streak or at least some good numbers. They sort of hung around, and again, they snuck into the postseason. And as we've talked about in the past, you just have to punch a ticket. And sometimes, whether it's the lights, being in the playoffs, knowing that in the Florida's case, this is kind of house money, maybe, the pressure's off of us. This team is dangerous, man. I think what's intriguing in this upcoming Eastern Conference Final is these two teams know how to forecheck. Both these teams know how to work the puck below each other's red lines. Both have decent, defensemen. I think Carolina's D is, a little bit more stacked than Florida's, but they know how to, shall we say, add offense. They know how to pinch in. They can get shots through. This is a very intriguing series. So, to go back to when's the last time, it isn't actually as far off as you think, because Carolina's kind of ridden a wave for the past couple of years. They've really sort of, shall we say, reinvigorated that franchise. Florida more recently, and again, they had higher expectations before the drop of the first puck in October. They were really toned back, and again, buying Buffalo having a monumental collapse, and Pittsburgh also having a really tough second half of the year. They're not even making the postseason. So they've sort of defied the odds, if you want to call it. Maybe that's the storyline or that's the intrigue. But we got to remember, too, preseason, a lot of people had Florida in a top 3 spot to finish the year. So maybe they're just finding the form at the right time. LA Kings, we keep referencing back to them in 2012. That's kind of what happened, whether it's lightning in a bottle or just something clicks at the right time. Florida's playing their best hockey of the year at the right time, and man, they're just as dangerous as this Carolina squad. And man, is this series going to be fun to watch in the Eastern Finals whenever that gets underway. Yeah, and getting goaltending too, which they weren't in the first half of the Boston series as well too. Of course, we will preview round number 3 right now. Dallas Stars leads the Seattle Kraken 1-0 after 2 periods of play. Rupe Hintz with the late goal in period number 2. The former Bismarck Bobcat for 2 games actually has the difference maker as they move into the final 20 minutes of play. You're too good. Get out of here. I'm guessing it was something at the end of the season where they brought him in for a couple of games and then probably said, yeah, you're too good. With that being said, we'll move over to guys who are too good. The NHL awards here, 3 award finalists here that we're going to pull up. We'll start, of course, with the Bill Masterson Trophy. Of course, this is the player who best exemplifies the qualities of perseverance, sportsmanship, and dedication to hockey. Chris Letang, Clayton Keller, and Alex Stalock are all your finalists. Of course, Letang with the Pittsburgh Penguins suffered the second stroke of his career in late November and returned to the ice, which is incredible to me. Insane.
He'll be 36 soon. Still led the Penguins in average ice time at just under 25 minutes and paced the defenseman with 12 goals, 41 points in 64 games. So apparently it's working for him. Clayton Keller, season ended a couple of weeks short, was stretched off the ice with that kind of gnarly leg injury in March. So he, of last year, of course, recovered from the surgery, had a career high 37 goals, 49 assists, played in every single contest for the Coyotes, tallying 86 points. Tied him with Keith Tkachuk for the most in a single season since the Coyotes moved to Arizona. So, great season for him. And then, of course, Alex Stalock, who had myocarditis, they expected him to probably never play in the show again. 27 games for the Hawks, a 908 and a 301 against opponents that were walking all over Chicago, basically, at 35 years of age. This one is always the hardest award to break down because all three of these guys are equally deserving. Is there one story that sticks out a little bit more than the rest? I mean, I know we love Alex Staal because of the former Minnesota connection, but I mean,
myocarditis, I mean, that's no laughing matter, right? I mean, and the fact that, you're able to get through that, but also Chris Letang, man. I mean, that's hard.
Yep.
That's hard to, because it's not like you're comparing, right? But you're also going, man, because when you describe the definition of the Masters and, dedication to hockey, right? Chris Letang, man, and it's not to me just the strokes, but also the concussions. He's been through a lot, and the fact that he was still able to strap on a pair of skates, go out there and skate 25 minutes a night on a team that really struggled, this year. In fact, missing the postseason really should have opened some eyes. And in fact, some changes in Pittsburgh, some still underway that need to be filled. Hard to argue against Chris Letang or Alex Staal. Clayton Keller, that's a great comeback story. I'm just not sure that it rises to the same level as the other two. It's a toss-up to me, but I think if I were to give a slight edge, it would be to Chris Letang.
Yep, I would agree with you too. Both incredible stories, both veteran guys, obviously, that have been through a lot too. Alex Stalock's journey a little bit different, of course, the Minnesota Duluth Bulldog former player as well too. So is he a Minnesota native? I don't remember.
I don't think he is. I'll check that for
I
you.
feel like I should know that. Alex Stalock. Good thing we have this thing called Google.
Right. I don't think he is a Minnesota native.
Well, let's take a look.
Or no, is he South St. Paul?
That's right. I felt like he was, but I wasn't sure, as you can obviously tell. Yeah, St. Paul, Minnesota, 1987. What a year. Moving on to the second award here, the Ted Lindsay Award finalist, the league's most outstanding player. This is voted on by members of the NHLPA rather than the professional hockey writers here. Connor McDavid, David Pastrnak, and Erik Karlsson were named the three award finalists here. I think this one's pretty cut and dry, if you ask me.
David.
Yeah, no question there.
Over 150 points, right? I mean, there's just not to take anything from David Pastrnak, who had quite himself a season. I don't know, it's Erik Karlsson. Karlsson, to me, it's the right three guys, right, in the conversation. What a resurgent year that Karlsson had. Again, David Pastrnak, over 60 goals. I mean, holy cow. Speaking of questions, man, Boston's got quite a few of those this offseason too. Not just, how the heck are we going to recover from literally laying the biggest egg in the first round of the playoffs minus Tampa Bay. But a lot of changes there. But McDavid, I don't know how you can someone that goes over 150 points. There's just no way.
Karlsson, a great mention. I still think he's going to win the Norris, like we talked about. Pastrnak, 113 points for him, factored in just under 38% of Boston's 301 goals this season. So that's a pretty impressive clip. But with McDavid, don't forget Karlsson and Pastrnak are first-time finalists. This will be McDavid's fourth if he wins it, which means that only Mario Lemieux and Wayne Gretzky have won at least four times. Of course, he had 153. At age 26, the first player to hit that mark since the aforementioned Mario Lemieux in 1995-96. To put that in perspective, both myself and Connor McDavid, who are barely a month apart in age, weren't even born yet. So, pretty impressive. Moving on to the last award here, Linus Ullmark. Ilya Sorokin and Connor Hellebuyck are the Vezina finalists, of course. Boston, New York Islanders, and Winnipeg Jets, respectively. All three had great seasons. Ilya Sorokin really kind of gets left out of the conversation for how good he actually is. Connor Hellebuyck has been in the mix a few times, and Linus Ullmark, of course, great season in front of a great team. Is there anybody that stands out to you?
This one's a little more tough because for me, Linus Ullmark, had a great year, but he also had a great team in front of him. Ilya Sorokin and Connor Hellebuyck, to me, they kind of willed those teams to the playoffs. If I'm, so to me, and granted, this is probably why I don't have a vote, right? It's between Hellebuyck and Sorokin. If I had to give a slight edge, it's probably Sorokin. But it's hard to take away what Hellebuyck did too. I mean, those are two franchises that are in desperate need of, shall we say, some and maybe an injection of change, to say it lightly. So I don't know. To me, Ullmark was great, but to me, he was also the beneficiary of a great system. To me, the other two, I think, had more to do with their team's success than Ullmark. So to me, it's either Sorokin or Hellebuyck.
It's a lot of people say Ullmark, it was kind of his by Christmas time. No, I wouldn't be shocked if he ends up with it. I mean, yes, he had a great team in front of him, but he had an unreal year. 49 appearances. He was 46-1. Good Lord.
I know.
Also scored this season. So if we're going by that, I mean, he's got it locked up, right? Like, I mean,
come on, let's be real. Yeah.
So here's an interesting trivia question for you. Who took home the Vezina last season? Do you remember?
Was it Vasilevsky?
It was not. It was New York Rangers' Igor Shesterkin.
Shesterkin, yeah.
Yeah, took home the award. Who took home the Ted Lindsay Award last season? Do you remember?
Ooh. Wasn't it McDavid?
It was not McDavid. It does start with an M, though.
Give me a second.
Is on a Canadian team.
I'm thinking.
Is on a Canadian team that's feeling very sad right now.
Edmonton. Okay.
Well, not McDavid, though.
Yeah, I know.
But it's not Edmonton.
Hold on.
Someone
M
who,
is the first name or M is the last name?
M starts with the last name. Someone who just declared that he wants an extension before the start of next season.
Hold on.
Would you like help?
Oh, Marner?
Austin
Matthews. Oh, Matthews. That's right. 60 goal a year. Jeez.
Yeah.
I forgot about that.
Average, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, interesting to see who's going to take home these awards. We turn our attention to the other side of the world, literally the men's worlds, taking a look at that as we wrap up the main portion of the show here. We're going to keep an eye on this. Thanks, man. I worked really hard on that. As Nick, of course, humorously notes, for those who watch the YouTube show, which there's been a lot more of you watching our YouTube channel lately, which we love it. So thanks so much. Leave a like for us, the little thumbs up button. We would love that. There is a little thing in our notes that I put that says switch graphics. So, just in case I forget.
Insert that joke here. Yes.
Change cue card now. So the men's worlds, of course, the United States has played 3 games. They've won all 3. They lead Group A. The leader for Group B is Canada, who's won 2 games and then an overtime victory for them. Goal differential of +10. The U.S. also +10 as well, too. So the U.S. beat Finland 4-1, Hungary 7-1, and Germany by a score of 3-2, which Germany has yet to win a game in 3 total contests. They've scored 5 and given up 8, so the U.S. got kind of a scare the other day. So the quarterfinals, of course, start in 10 days, May 25th. Normally 1A plays 4B, 2A plays 3B, and they cross pool essentially for the top 4 in each pool. That will be the case unless the exception of if both the host teams, Finland and Latvia, both qualify and are slated to play each other. Latvia currently 6th right now in the Group B bracket, and Finland currently 4th in the Group A. So the likelihood is low. But if that ever happened, then it would mean where that the quarterfinal matches will take place within the group. So Group A would play the 4th place team in Group A instead of crossing over for that reason. So, and then teams are reseeded for the semifinals based on how they performed in their group stages, not in the medal round, in the group stages. The bottom 2 performers of each group in the group stage as well will be demoted from the championship level to Division 1A for the next year's World Championship. So there is things on the line as far as that is concerned. As far as points for who those bottom 2 teams are, in the B side, it is Norway with 1 point and Slovenia with 0. So and then Germany and Hungary both have 0 on the other side. So as it stands today, the U.S., Sweden, Denmark, and Finland round out your top 4 in Group A, followed by France, Austria, Hungary, and Germany. And then in Group B, it's Canada, the Czechs, the Swiss, and the Slovakians rounding out the top 4 in Group B, with Kazakhstan, Latvia, Norway, and Slovenia rounding out the 8 that comprise Group B. So the U.S. still has Austria, Denmark, France, and Sweden left in their 7-game slate, Nick. There's been some good hockey, that's come out of this. Of course, you look at the U.S. roster, a little bit younger, a little bit closer to what I would say akin to, I don't want to say the World Junior roster, but I want to say in the idea that, they kind of have this healthy mix where it's not fully NHL laden players versus this Canadian roster looks a lot more heavy on the NHL roster side here. But the player that actually paces this tournament right now is actually Dominik Kubalik, the Czech forward, of course, the former Chicago Blackhawk forward, and then Mackenzie Weegar on the back end for Canada as well, too, pacing with 6 points respectively. Lucas Sedlak, Nikolai Ehlers has 4 points as well. Rocco Grimaldi with 4 points, the former North Dakota. I guess, would he have been a Fighting Hawk or before that time? But nonetheless, Nick, it's been some good hockey Anything you've noticed? It's definitely been must watch if you're bored on a Sunday at 12 o'clock in the afternoon, for sure.
U.S. and Canada both look really good, actually. They show speed, and like you mentioned, U.S. not maybe the household names, but how about a couple of former Huskies, right? How about Mikey Asamont that was added to the roster late due to an injury? Nick Perbix has been, taking first line minutes on the deep pairings with how about this former NCHC player Dylan Sandberg? How about that? They've been
and Scott Perunovich on the back end too. Yeah,
a lot of NCHC, shall we say, flavor.
And NCAA, Andres Bjork, of course, former Notre Dame Fighting Irish.
Yep. Ronnie Adder, again, former Western Michigan Bronco.
Yep. Cal Peterson, Drew Comesso, Matt Coronado, Alex Tuck, who got in a fight the other day.
Well, not shocking, but
Carter Mazer as well, too, the former Denver Pioneer.
So, a lot of great. But how about this for Wild fans? How about Jesper Wallstad, Sweden?
Yeah.
There are 8 goals for, 1 goal against. He's got a shutout. And you talk about, goaltenders and players that seem to rise, when it matters most. How about Jesper Wallstad? Man, had a pretty good year in Iowa, all things considered. But man, as he looked pretty sharp early on and here in this, shall we say, this group sort of round robin play. Again, only 1 goal against in 2 contests. Man, as he looks solid.
Has he played? I don't think he's played.
He has a shutout. Yes, he has.
Well, why is Lars Johansson listed as the netminder that has?
I don't know.
Yeah,
because that's what I remember seeing, unless I'm completely going crazy, which that wouldn't surprise everybody.
That's like a 60-40 probability, is it not?
That's not, well, no, but seriously, I swear it was Wallstead that was in net.
Well, let me see if I can pull up the team stats here and just make sure. Here's the thing, though, is that the conversation has been around Philip Gustafson in the Minnesota Wild, by the way, too. And the question is he going to be long-term more than the next year or two, or is Jesper Wallstedt actually a tradable commodity? I know that's a crazy thing to think about, but
Wallstedt does have a shutout too. So,
maybe it was a tandem shutout. I wonder if that's how that ended up going.
Either way.
Yeah. Well, Sweden's playing well.
Yeah.
I think that's what we're trying to get to. You look on the Canadian side, Jacob Middleton, of course, Minnesota Wild player. Yeah, there's something that must be wrong about these lineups, unless this has been the case for Canada. Jacob Middleton is listed as a forward, so
that's what?
And Pierre Oliver Joseph is listed as a defenseman. So
something's goofy there. Yeah,
I'm a little bit confused.
Slightly.
Devin Levi, of course, in net for Canada as well. Sam Montembeault as well, having a very good time as well. Tyler Toffoli, another notable name. Former Minnesota Wild defenseman Brad Hunt as well in that. Adam Fantilli, I'm sure all eyes will be on him on the Canadian side as well, wearing number 91. So, yeah, a lot of good hockey left to be played here. And I think that as this tournament goes on, we'll kind of get a better feel as to where some of these teams are. I think once you're, most of the teams have played 2-3 games max. So it's kind of hard to get a real feel for, like, Germany. Like I said, they haven't won a game. And it's kind of like, did they just really struggle out of the gate, or are they better than what their record suggests and they've just got some work to do? The biggest thing is you want to finish 6th or higher if you want to have a chance to play in the next World. So that's obviously important. Is there anything else you wanted to add related to the men's Worlds? I think we're going to probably have a little bit more, like I said, to expand on as we move on in the coming weeks, but
no, but it does kind of get overshadowed by the Stanley Cup playoffs. But if they're not on, because obviously the frequency is going to get less with now we're at conference final stage. This is some good hockey on the international stage, and as you mentioned, some some stalwarts that are out there, and some local kids that we know, as well as Minnesota Wild players. So there's some intrigue there, but more so Adam Fantilli again with the projected number 2 overall pick. So there's a lot to like about this.
What's funny is I got a text from a buddy back in Canada, and it's funny. He was watching the first round of the NHL playoffs, and this, of course, relates to the roster for the U.S. team for the World Cup. Now, he texts me and he goes, man, that this Nick Perbix kid for Tampa Bay is pretty good on the back end. Like, what do you know about him? And I'm like, oh, you mean former Huskies Warming House podcast guest Nick Perbix? Yeah, he's pretty good at hockey. Like, what an amazing growth that he's had. We talked about him, in his kind of ascension right away, where he took his opportunity, and then a guy like Mikey Asamont that you talk about, who's really had to grind his way and earn his opportunity a little bit, and kind of how short and limited your window is. And we talked about Nick Perbix, and not to say that Nick Perbix isn't fully deserving of being an NHL talent, but think about his start, right? He had like 12 points in his first 8 games. Like he just exploded out of the gate, and you wonder how different it would have been if he would have had 1 point and went -5, right? Like,
especially with John Cooper, right? Because John Cooper, if there's one thing that he preaches, that's just smart puck management, right? If you talk about a team that breaks out, that has different types of zone entries, that forechecks in a smart hockey IQ high level, it's John Cooper and the Tampa Bay Lightning. And for Nick Perbix, when you go into a system that, I don't want to say it's complicated, but it just preaches, to reduce mistakes and, to make sure that every stride that you make, every pass is with the purpose, right? That can swallow you up as a young player, right? And for him to come in, feel comfortable. I mean, and I saw the first couple of games, it looked like there was a learning curve there, as you would expect, right? But then he kind of settled in. And then I think when Sergachev went down too, and it really opened up to almost like a top 4 sort of audition. He really held his ground well. I mean, he was physical. I mean, heck, he put a nice hit on. I'm trying to remember who he blew up. Was that Matthew Tkachuk? It was Matthew Tkachuk in a game against Florida.
You can remember that, but you can't remember Austin Matthews. Anyway,
I know, right? It's weird that sometimes the sparks fly, sometimes
wrong blue jersey, I guess.
Yeah, I guess. You're killing me here. I need to change the light bulbs anyway. But no, I think once he got settled in back to Perbix, it really felt like he felt like at home, right? And more so, his offensive instincts, I think, really do flourish under John Cooper's system, right? Because it allows him to responsibly pinch. It allows him to jump up on the rush. And you talk about guys like Victor Hedman and even Sergachev, who are guys that can carry the puck out of the zone, where we saw that with Nick Perbix's game. To me, it was an easy translate. And then, Mikey Azamon, too, a guy that, as far as a bottom 6 guy, I mean, you talk about grinding, that's kind of his style of play. Man, was he noticeable in that first round series against Toronto. Probably wanted a few more points on the board, but man, was that fourth line disruptive to Toronto most of that series. If they would have been able to pot a few more, shall we say, pucks in the basket, they may have, shall we say, turned that series around and made Toronto cry again, which would have been
do you ever wonder what it must be like, though, for a guy like Nick Perbix? So, like, imagine growing up watching, in later stages Kucherov, but a guy like Steven Stamkos, and then you're suddenly in a locker room with him. Like, that must be a wild
it's crazy,
experience.
Right? And, it's kind of twofold, right? Because I think, obviously you're starstruck, but I remember, one of my first NHL interviews going back to probably 2009?
1886. Oh, sorry.
It's close. I'm trying to think. It was Brent Burns, actually, when he was still with the Wild. And you're kind of starstruck, but then you kind of remember, I have a job to do. I got to get quotes, and I'm trying to write a feature on Brent Burns. And so it lasts a little bit. But then all of a sudden, you start to get to know some guys like Andrew Brunette, interviewed him a couple different times as a player, as well as at that time, as sort of a front office guy, Mikko Koivu, Derek Bugard. I didn't get to talk with him much, but got to interview him a couple of times. John Scott, Cal Clutterbuck. They had essentially murderers row in the Minnesota Wild locker room to the right side. They're all three of them were right next to each other. It was kind of funny.
Just don't set your bag down on the wrong side of the line.
No, that was Greg Zanon. So that was definitely whoops. But anyway, lesson learned. So I didn't step on the logo, though. That's the one thing I did know. I just didn't know the other boxes anyway. So at the end of it,
Nick has troubles with shapes. He's still got the little box thing where you put all the shapes in the correct hole, and he's still working
it's called building blocks get real. So but then Stefan Veilleux too, talking with him a couple times off the ice too in different roles. Jason Zucker, I remember I was at the training camp when he was cut from the opening lineup. He was one of the last round of cuts, and when you're obviously you feel for the player, but at the end of the day, right, there's some stardom there, but I think the more you're around him, you're like, okay, nope, I'm here to play hockey, right? So I think it's fine, right?
Well, we asked the question when we had Nick Dowd on a couple summers ago, and I remember we asked him the question, and he's like, yeah, I sit right next to the big guy or whatever. No, he's very calm and casual, and I think you just get to that point, obviously, where you. Yeah. Once you've played enough games, I imagine it takes maybe 10 games or so before you really are like, okay, like I'm I'm where I'm supposed to be,
or getting your car filled with like, packing peanuts, that first, sort of little, locker room prank stuff. I mean,
yeah.
Can you imagine that locker room with Fleury? You almost have to always have your head in a swivel. My gosh. But I think that's kind of what it is, because, there's that celebrity it's not status, but like, almost that celebrity sort of like you got him on a pedestal, right? Where it's like, you don't know the person.
Yeah, there's like this aura around them.
Yeah. And then all of a sudden, like, instead of it being sort of this, thing that you maybe, like, oh, I wish I could meet this person, it'd be kind of cool. All of a sudden, your teammates and, in Nick Dowd's situation, you're essentially locker room stall mates. And all of a sudden it's, less of reading a magazine or social media about somebody. It's like, all of a sudden you're sitting next to each other in the bus, maybe your roommate's in a hotel room, you're grabbing lunch, and all of a sudden, you're waking up with shaving cream in your towel, and then you're, getting it back with, some other kind of stunt, and it becomes kind of fun, right? So, it's got to be a cool feeling, especially for someone who, like Nick Perbix, who, again, we lauded his skill set from his freshman year. We saw that there was the potential there. And as you mentioned before, right, for him to get his first real crack at the can this early in his pro career, and to be able to stick around too. It's one thing to get a crack at it. It's another thing to stick around. And, just ask Acemont, right? He's had a couple different cracks at a couple different organizations, hasn't really found, shall we say, that consistent fit yet. He might have found it. In Tampa, again, they re-signed him very quickly, although it is a two-way deal. But, it's hard to get there. It's even hard to stick around, but got to enjoy it.
Well, and we had the conversation with Nick Perbix and also about Sammy Walker, and we talked about, we're like, we don't know if they're going to stick in the show. And like we said, it wasn't anything against them. It was more like, we realize how hard it is and how limited your window is. And it's like, we know what they bring to the table, but it's like, who's evaluating you? Do they recognize that? Do they recognize what you bring to the table? And
yeah, and every player is different, right? So, like, for example, I know when we talk about players and sticking, how big of a year this is for Marco Rossi, right? In terms of, and granted, he's had a year taken away because of, his heart complications due to COVID, right? Myocarditis, I believe, also is it correct? Yeah. So, but you do kind of get the sense that, as a ninth overall pick, that, with what they were hoping to see in Iowa, and I still wonder if part of maybe the lack of success or maybe lack of development was a big reason for the Iowa Wild changes. I'm not so sold that it's playoff success. There's probably a little bit about that too.
And maybe a little bit of grittiness too. And with this kind of goes back to the Nick Perbix conversation. I think of him in comparison with another great defenseman like Jack Ashawn. One of the things that, and it's no fault of anybody in the game today has certainly changed, but Nick Perbix is a good 5-6 inches taller than Jack Ashawn is. Same with the conversation, Rossi, not a small guy, but not the biggest dude in the world, and it's like,
and how do you play it, right? At the end of the day, I remember, when we played intramurals, was that 2019? Was that 4 years ago?
It was like 70 years ago.
Jesus Lord. Let's just say that you probably got the first taste of my motor mouth, especially when a certain player had the puck on a stick and didn't know how offsides worked.
Yeah, that was like 85% of our team, but all right.
Yeah, that's pretty nice. But at the end of the day, though, I think what you learn in the situations, Noah,
it's how to yell your chirps appropriately, but also
but at the end of the day, like, especially for me, because I was always the small guy, I never had a growth spurt. So it was my dad and a couple of my coaches like, well, you hear that stupid, not the side of the dog, but they're like, no, you're going to have to stand your ground because you're going to get picked on, because you can almost use that to your advantage a little bit. And I kind of, don't get me wrong, I had to learn that a little bit. And, it's less about maybe that you throw your weight around, but more how to throw what little you have in the right scenario. And, you kind of have to pick and choose your times to do it, but you
come on. We had fun. I had a great time having you on the 2.5 men line. It was good. I mean,
I was like two of the 2.5, and the other two guys were just striding around there.
That's kind of sounds like our podcast.
And also slap shots from the point also are great. So
yeah, it sounds like our podcast is two guys just trying to make the thing
fractured
work. And it's a tough one, a little broken in the end.
It's fractured. So.
Yeah. With that being said, something that is on the cusp of being fractured is somebody's playoff hopes here. Going towards the third round, we're going to head on to the extra ice session where we preview the final 4 teams in the conference finals. And welcome into the Extra Ice Up in episode 162 here in the Huskies Warming House podcast. I've messed up that intro like 1.5 times already. We're not redoing it.
You need a cue card, don't you?
Nick Maxon. Hello, my name is Russell, and I am part of True Number. Anyway, name the movie, please. Drop it in the comments. But things are looking up for some teams in the NHL playoffs here. Specifically, we're going to start in the East. You can smile. It's okay. You're allowed to laugh. I have dad jokes. They're in the cue cards. We start with Carolina and Florida, which we talked about in the earlier portions of the show. Should be an intriguing matchup here. I mean, first of all, the basic question: what is your prediction for length of games? And I mean, who wins this series?
Man. To me, it's got 6 or 7 written all over Florida in the Eastern Final here.
Yeah,
it's really tough to gauge. Now, the one caveat to this is you have essentially, not maybe directly, but sort of insinuate that Florida maybe is in a spot that they maybe shouldn't be, just based on skill, right?
Yeah.
I don't buy that, at least entirely. The one thing about Carolina is, as we mentioned, that's a balanced hockey squad. They've got great weapons up front. We know about the defense and how they definitely like to be involved offensively. They've got some size back there. Goaltending has been good from this year. Like you said, it's hard to find like really a true weakness with Carolina. There's maybe a couple maybe shortcomings, but not a true weakness. With Florida, to me, it's hard because they've essentially, as we discussed earlier in the show, it's hard to find maybe that one thing, but also like, wait, what? Where did this team come from? Their forecheck is good. Their D is good. Their goaltending has been insane with Bobrovsky. Again, you could have argued that he has willed them to the Eastern Conference Final. The one thing with Florida to me is consistency, if there's anything for them. There were times even during their 5-game trouncing of the Maple Leafs where they gave us some odd man rushes. They looked a little discombobulated in the defensive zone. So if Florida can essentially, and it's not going to be easy, can essentially play the way they've been playing, they got to play in the offensive zone, let that Kachuk line go to work with Carter for Hagee, and I'm trying to remember who else is on that line. Oh, Sam Bennett. That's going to way that they win the series is by grinding this out. Carolina, if you kind of pinch them in their own zone, like most teams at this stage of the year, you can tire them out. I mean, there's a lot of hockey that's been played. It's been a lot of intense hockey. The first 8 wins for both squads. I still feel like Carolina has an edge in this series just because of, again, that balance. And again, I feel like they have more weapons up front. They can come at you more waves and kind of, shall we say, absorb, shall we say, a little bit more limited Florida attack. That's how I see it. How do you see it?
Well, it's kind of interesting just what these two teams bring to the table, like you had mentioned. I mean, you have obviously players that, Matthew Tkachuk has been a difference maker in Florida for a variety of reasons. And not to say that Jonathan Huberdeau wasn't, but you wondered how they were going to adjust with the loss of both, Jonathan Huberdeau and Mackenzie Weegar. But I think once the Panthers started to get goaltending where they at least felt comfortable in front of, and guys that have stepped up. I mean, you think about guys that are not household names, Radko Gudas, right? A guy like that who has suddenly elevated his game to the next level, become a lot more disciplined in recent years. Things are kind of coming together for this Florida team here. Dare I say, I think Florida gets it done in 6, honestly. Because there's just something about this team. When you kind of have that, I don't know, feeling of destiny is the right answer, but for whatever reason, the Achilles heel for Carolina has been in the conference finals. It's been, I believe the last time was 1996 that Florida ever has even made a conference final.
No, conference final, because remember, 06, they won the cup.
No, not Carolina, Florida.
Oh, Florida, yeah. I thought you said my gosh.
Yeah. So, no.
Yeah, because after that, they didn't want a playoff series, right?
Yeah, well, Carolina has made the conference final in like 2 of the past 4 years or something like that. I mean, they've had a really good run here. For Florida, sometimes it's a good thing knowing where you haven't been because you don't have an expectation of how it's supposed to go kind of thing. And I think that's kind of what this team has a little bit, again, reminiscent of the 2012 LA Kings, whereas like they finally were the first team to give that program or organization some resurgence. And they finally found their groove and they didn't look back after that, scary kerfluffle in round number 1. So you look at him, Carter Verhaeghe has obviously been an animal. Really, I think the two Sams have really impressed me too. Sam Bennett and Sam Reinhart. Sam Reinhart was really serviceable, especially in that second round. Anthony Duclair has used his speed really, really well, and is a name that he really doesn't, get a lot of talk with. I mean, you look at, Sergei Bobrovsky, a 2.82, for his goals against, which has been more than serviceable as well. On the other side, like you talked about, though, is you've got a team in Carolina who obviously has had some good performers too. Sebastian Aho, Jordan Martinook, what an amazing playoffs that he's had. Seth Jarvis, Jesper Foss, Jordan Staal, Jesperi Kotkaniemi, guys that you don't normally. I would say the first. I mean, Jordan Staal, I guess, in years past, but Brent Burns is the first household name that shows up on this list, and he's what, 6th on this list. I mean, it's like, they're a team that wins by committee, similar to Florida, but I think they're just more balanced as far as being the deeper hockey team. I think Florida, what they bring to the table is that intangible X factor of being this scrappy, hard-nosed team that just, like, not only do you have to beat them on the ice physically, you have to almost beat them mentally in their will to not want to lose kind of thing. They have that feel about them. I'm on it, man. I'm on the Florida bandwagon. So, of course, that naturally means they're likely going to lose. But, I mean...
Jordan Staal versus Eric Staal. Remember, holy cow, Eric Staal getting another crack out of these final.
And Mark Staal, too.
Yeah, and Mark Staal. Wow. That's... I don't think all three have been that far, like, either with or against each other. I don't think so. Holy cow. That's insane.
That'll be fun.
That'll be fun.
Freddie Anderson with a 1.8, by the way.
Freddie Anderson has looked good. Then again, he's also, I think, especially against the Islanders, right?
Mm-hmm.
They just, I don't know, dispatched him pretty quick. Let's put it that way. At the end of it, that's going to be, I think, the key for Florida, right? Is Carolina does really well at protecting the house. Can they get? And this is where Matthew Tkachuk can shine, right? Is he can be that pest. Same with Sam Bennett, to kind of get into the kitchen of Freddie Anderson and make his life work, quite a bit harder than it probably has been used to. This again, like, there's no clear front runner in this series. There's a lot of things that each team can maybe exploit a little bit about the other, but there's really, it's almost like, I don't want to say a wash, but it's like who can essentially keep playing their game the most consistently is what it's going to come down to.
Well, can Florida break through? You look at both these teams, exactly 40 goals for. The difference is Florida's given up 37, Carolina's only given up 28. So, their goals against per game is a full half a goal less per game than their opponents. So can they solve the net minding? Can the Florida Panthers break through with this net minding wall? I think that, realistically, though, you look at what they did against Linus Ullmark. I mean, they found a way there. Power play percentage has been a factor for Florida, almost 21%. Carolina's has been relatively non-existent. But the PK side of things, it's flipped. Carolina's at 90%, Florida just under 66% on the PK. So you've got to, find a way to make sure that you're handling the special teams battle as well too. Both these teams not great in the faceoff dot either. So again, it's weird. Carolina has had this weird habit, at least in the second round with New Jersey, and now round number 3 against matching up with teams that have similar numbers, and they're not necessarily great numbers, which is not necessarily the conversation you're having in the conference final. So, so you're feeling Florida. Any idea how many games?
I still feel like it's 6 or 7. I really do.
Well, pick one.
Fine. Let's go 7.
Okay. In overtime, right?
No, not overtime.
Mark Staal walking Jordan Staal for the game.
Yeah, wouldn't that be something?
Oh man,
it won't be Eric Staal. He can't. He can escape it barely. But no, like to your point though, with Carolina though, I just feel like with those defensive numbers, I mean, you talk about the player that the teams that they face. Again, they faced a very lethargic New York Islanders squad in round 1, and then essentially a tuckered out and wasted New Jersey Devils squad in round 2. I'm just not sure they've seen a team as resilient and as, shall we say, in your face as Florida is. I mean, as Boston, as Toronto, how it went, right? So it's kind of a wild card, and it's kind of fun to talk. I mean, this is the kind of conference final matchup you want, where it's like, okay, each team has got something to do well. There's not, again, like this, obvious beacon of weakness on either squad. There's maybe, again, as we talked about, areas that maybe each team has an area of the upper hand of the other. But I just feel like Florida, just because of you got to have belief in that locker room right now. When you take down the best ever regular season team in Boston, Toronto, which that team, after getting past round one, only got one game more out of that. So, but you had to think that Toronto probably came to that series feeling pretty good, right? And maybe that's the mentality, right? No, do you think Florida is still thinking that they're playing with house money now, or now they're just like, oh no, we believe we can do this? This is Benny the Jet Rodriguez outrunning, the beast, and going over the fence. I don't know. Like, I almost kind of feel like I almost
think like playing with house money is the better mentality for them, because if you almost feel like you're taking nothing for granted, but you're excited about the opportunity, like I said, I think the ability that the Panthers have had is they played a lot looser because of that fact. They don't feel like they've had that added pressure. Let's say they get swept in 4 games this series, their season will still be considered a monumental success because of the slow start they had in the regular season and the fact they barely eked into the playoffs, and that's something where you look at that and say, okay, like, yeah, we feel good about it here. So yeah, no, it'll be interesting. I think that Florida Carolina series is going to be must-watch hockey. We don't have the schedules out yet, but one of the things we didn't mention this in the early portions of the show, we're going to try to coincide next week's episode either Monday or Tuesday, and then the week after we're going to try to follow the end of round 3 of the playoffs if we can. So that's kind of our plan there. On the other side, we still await the Dallas-Seattle game. Dallas up 2-0. Wyatt Johnston with the separator. The Seattle Kraken, I believe, only have 2 or 3 shots in period number 3 as of speaking, with just under 5 minutes left. Kraken, a tight defensive battle for this group here. So, but on the starting side of this, it's funny, Rupe Hintz actually leads the team in points with 18 for the Dallas Stars, and of course scored what would be the game winner right now tonight. But let's talk about this Vegas team to start as we wait for the result of this. Jack Eichel, the man who had long waited for playoff action, finally got it and has made no mistake. 14 points for him. Mark Stone, healthy back and everything. 12 points for him. Chandler Stevenson, Jonathan Marchessault, who averages almost 5 shots a game right now in the playoffs, has been an absolute tank. Ivan Barbashev, a great pickup for them.
Really good pickup
in recent weeks. How about Michael Amadio, by the way? 5 points for him.
Amadio, yeah.
Yeah, Aiden Hill has been serviceable at 219, actually a little bit better numbers than Lauren Brossoit, who, of course, is still rehabilitating from injury. And then Alex Pietrangelo, Shea Theodore. I think it's interesting, both of those defensemen, right? Not original Vegas Golden Knights by any means. And in some senses, not necessarily expansion draft pickups either. So I think that you look at, I mean, Shea Theodore, sure, but like you look at
Theodore wasn't original, was it?
Yeah, but Alex Pietrangelo, much different story and what they've brought to the table here. So, and this Vegas team, by the way, sits number 1 in terms of their production: 41 goals for, 33 goals against, a 3.73 goals for, and a 3 goals against. Power play just under 18%, not the greatest PK at 60%, but good face-off winning percentage, and they're putting a lot of pucks on net. So they are giving up quite a bit though too, which will be interesting to see. Whichever team comes out of this, Dallas or Seattle, is a great defensively minded team with a little bit of offensive punch. Both those teams. It's going to be a much different series than the Edmonton series. Let's just put it that way. Vegas is going to have to play a good 200-foot game, and they're going to have to bring the firepower in terms of production here. What do you like about the Vegas Golden Knights, regardless of who they get, Dallas or Seattle, as we're in the waning moments of that one? What do you like about them, and what makes you a little bit nervous about them?
So for Vegas, and you talked about Jack Eichel and his production, I will tell you this: for those who've watched Jack Eichel, what's even probably more impressive than his production is how good he's been on his defensive zone, especially when he was paired up with McDavid over the past couple of games, blocking shots, coming back and stripping pucks, just making really good puck management decisions. To me, he has been a 200-foot playoff performer for the Golden Knights. To me, even strength, Vegas, they're one of the better teams at 5-on-5. Granted, I think the PK numbers, they're not good, but I think they're skewed when you're going up against Edmonton. Let's be honest. But at the end of the day, one thing that scares me about Vegas is if you take a look at the first 20 minutes of last night's game, they looked, shall we say, not engaged. to put it lightly. And the fact that they came out, scored, I think, the first 17 seconds of the game, then gave up quickly 2 goals in a minute and 29 seconds combined to be down 2-1. To me, they've got to play a full 60-minute game. To me, sometimes I've seen them have lapses in their game, but when they play their game where they get the puck below the red line, when they cycle, when they possess it, that fourth line will carry I'm trying to think, Teddy Bluger, and then
would Key and Colasar be in that
Ian
group?
Colasar, he would be. That's one of the best fourth lines that's out there for playoff hockey teams that are left. So they kind of turned the tides in the second period and were able to recapture that. And Marcia, so holy cow, a natural hat trick.
And how about some of these unsung guys too, like Zach Whitecloud, for example? Think about 2.5 years ago, he wasn't even remotely like an NHL regular, essentially, in some senses.
No, and that's the thing, right? Is, the one thing that's really great about staying in the Cup playoffs is you get these sort of unsung heroes because, again, we talk about all the time, right? Your top end performers, especially the offensive side, they're going to see the best shutdown units, of the opposition, so that it allows guys like, shall we say, Zach Whitecloud, guys like for Florida, like a Carter Verhaeghe, to kind of emerge from the soil, right, and to be able to have that free and open space. That maybe the counterparts like Sasha Barkov just don't, right? So it's cooler because you get, these are the guys. I mean, what was it last year? It was Valerie Nichushkin for Colorado, right? It wasn't the big name guys, but Nichushkin, and you could even argue Nazem Kadri, who has a namesake to himself too, but they carried that Colorado team to a Stanley Cup victory and raising the cup there in Game 6 against Tampa Bay. So at the end of it, for me, Vegas, again, 5-on-5 play is their strength, especially when they possess the puck. But again, consistency and especially being ready to start, man. If Edmonton had gotten another one in the first, they were down 3-1. I think we're talking Game 7 even tonight. To me, the consistency in their game just has to be there because remember, they got throttled. What was it, Game 4?
Yeah.
Against Edmonton. So, that to me is what's concerning to me about Vegas is they have times where they look like they're a complete hockey team. And other times it's like they don't even know they're playing hockey. And that's a concern, especially going into a conference final series.
Yeah, they're just a streaky team, right? I think that's the biggest thing. And looking at this right now, the Stars lead the Kraken 2-0 with 27 seconds left in this one. Awesome. So I would say that we're pretty close to this. So regardless, though, Seattle or Dallas, it looks like it's going to be Dallas. Both of those teams, we talk about bring a consistent game. It's not like those teams get readily outplayed. I think the one outlier was Game 2 in that last series between Dallas and Seattle. But other than that, it's been real tight checking as far as that goes. Both of these clubs, why don't we start with Dallas? Because it seems like they're going to be the likely one here. Great offensive punch, good depth, and good defensive play, and a world-class goaltender. What do you like about them? What makes you nervous if they match up against the Golden Knights?
I like Dallas's attack. And again, it's, they know that game is final now, so we can say it. It's going to be the Dallas Stars. Obviously, goaltending is their big strength with Jake Ottinger. Now he has shown a little bit of, shall I say, being human here in the second round. But then again, I think at times too, the defensive structure in front of Dallas has also failed them at times. Dallas can sometimes, with their active D, shall we say, get a little pinch happy and allow some odd man breaks against their own goaltender. But here's the thing about Dallas. When you've got 38-year-old Joe Pavelski that still can come back from a concussion, score 4 goals, can tip pucks, he plays a 200-foot game. Holy cow, right? I mean,
I'm laughing because there's 17 seconds left and the Kraken just scored. So
well, okay, 17 seconds at the end.
Oliver Bjorkstrand, by the way.
Yeah.
So
well,
hey,
pinch me if they tie it because that would be something.
I'm warming up the car now.
I pretty much warm up the bus anyway. But no, to me, Dallas. I mean, that's partly what they generate so much in the rush. They're a speedy team. And again, you talk about their depth, right? We talked about Pavelski. How about Wyatt Johnson, Rope Hintz, Jamie Benn, Tyler Seguin have all seen kind of resurgence this year under Pete DeBoer. His first round to go with the Dallas Stars, and it has kind of opened up the game for him. And you talk about a guy like Miro Haskin in the back end, right? And then Harley, right? Kind of a younger defenseman who stepped. He's looked really, really good, for Dallas this year. You talk about balance, right? There's no question to me that Dallas is the more probably deeper team on paper. The thing is for Dallas, and to me is, we've seen what happens when they've got good defensive structure. Jake Ottinger will stop most pucks all day. There's no question about it. But the times where they've been a little bit shaky, especially when they allow guys to kind of stand in front of the crease, that seems to disrupt them a little bit. So to me, that's sort of, shall I say, the Achilles heel of Dallas is if you put bodies in front of Jake Ottinger and just, attract attention in front of the blue paint. It just doesn't allow them to be as aggressive defensively as I think they'd like to be. And that creates, shall we say, some open ice for guys like Shea Theodore, guys who can walk them like Alec Martinez, who are really good at getting pucks through, let's not count out Pietrangelo too. So it's an interesting series, but you're not laughing at me yet. So that means that Seattle did not tie this hockey game.
Well, there's 9 seconds. This has the feeling of like a basketball game, does it not? There's 9 seconds left, so I'm assuming that somebody has a
fourth timeout already.
Someone has a face off, which makes me feel like, though, if we're getting this kind of stoppage, I'm guessing either Dallas ice the puck or the Kraken have an offensive zone draw in some capacity. So
probably,
isn't it fun trying to figure out how a hockey game is going strictly from the box score and flow of play?
It's impossible.
I mean, you're allowed to follow the game summary because they do have a game flow summary essentially, but
don't they realize that people don't read anymore? I mean, come on.
I mean, I've been practicing, and that's also, can our listeners and viewers tell that we're trying to stall for time because we're having this basketball style?
I think they've known that for some time here.
End to this. I think regardless, Seattle and Dallas have a very similar style of play. So regardless of who it is, do you have a team in mind? Is it Vegas or is it not Vegas, and how many games? To me, honestly, I think, we are final now. So the Stars did win 2-1. I think Dallas takes this one in 6.
I'm with you on Dallas.
I like the Stars game. It's just a complete game.
It is. And again, like Vegas, to me, they're great, but when they're good, when they're on, right? They're tough to contend with. But again, we talked about some inconsistencies with them. Dallas, they've had a few lapses here and there, but it haven't been, shall I say, to the levels of extreme that we've seen with Vegas. And to me, I just think there's more ways of attack that Dallas can bring at you. I really do. And minus Pietrangelo trying to, saw somebody's arm off, aka Leon Draisaitl, should be fine. And as long as, I guess, Suter doesn't give any cross checks, we'll be fine too.
3 points for him in the series, but look at these guys: Rupe Hintz, Robertson, Max Domi, 18, 12, 11 points. Pavelski and Jamie Benn with 10. How about Joe Pavelski, his 4-goal effort that one night? That was unreal. Miro Heiskanen paces defensive with 9 points, along with Tyler Seguin, Dodona, Marchman, Thomas Harley, like you mentioned. Contributors up and down this Dallas Stars lineup. The Stars, of course, along with the Kraken, sit 5th and 4th respectively in terms of production here. 45 goals for the best in the NHL for the Dallas Stars, 39 goals against. And as far as the PK, 83%, so not terrible. Power play percentage just under 33%. This is a dangerous Dallas Stars team on both sides of special teams here.
Rematch of their 2020 conference final.
Yeah, and they are also a league best faceoff percentage, 57.5%. So they are good in the dot too. This is a very well-oiled machine. And did I mention they have probably a guy who might win the Vezina within the next 5 years in Lakefield native Jake Ottinger. I like the Stars here, Nick, and I think you do too. It's just, I think Vegas, they're a good team, but there's little pockets of inconsistencies that Dallas really hasn't shown. They've had small flourishes. I think game 6, first period the other night, of course, game number 2 as well too. But like by and large, maybe one lapse against Minnesota in game number 3. But other than that, I mean, it hasn't really been, series breaking, back breaking efforts. No. Vegas has had a topsy-turvy ride. I expect Dallas to continue the Norm Greenism and have success away from Minnesota.
Yeah, and let's put it this way, whether it's Florida or whether it's Carolina, if it is Dallas, they've got their hands full because right now, the 4 teams that are left, I think Dallas, if we're going to go 1 through 4, probably right now is number 1 on most people's books.
I hate to say it too. It's nice to see that Seattle didn't go all the way. I think it would have been hard for a lot of franchises to swallow if a team like that does go all the way. We talked about with Vegas too, which Vegas is now, in year 6 or whatever, but it's like, and even then it's a little bit hard to palate. So I hate to say it, but you almost hope that Dallas is the team that comes out of that conference final just for the sake of the fact they've been there before. They've won a cup in 99, like, versus the expansion franchise.
Which cloud are you yelling at again?
The White Cloud. Zach White Cloud. Did you hear about that, by the way? The reference that broadcaster called him toilet paper. Oh boy, yikes.
It's like it's not even a good one. Like,
it wasn't even
like,
but it's kind of, I mean, not to say every last name is like this, but it's like a 5-second Google search would have given you a very good inclination of what his last name means. Like, just math.
Anyway, or just, you don't have to be a DICK, but anyway.
Yeah, so that's the thing, is we're thinking Dallas and we're thinking Florida, which would be a monumentally intriguing Stanley Cup final by
everything below 38th parallel. That's insane.
Yeah, be a very, very warm Stanley Cup final. When is the last time we've had two franchises that have been like totally Southern franchises make a Stanley Cup final? Who did the Kings play in 12 and 14? Who did they play?
Kings play New Jersey in 12 and the Rangers in 14.
Yeah, so it's been, I don't know that we've ever had a...
What about Anaheim in 2007?
They had Ottawa.
That's right. I'm trying to think.
I don't know that we've ever had a...
San Jose and Nashville was probably the closest.
San Jose never...
Oh, sorry, San Jose Pitt. Yeah, no.
San Jose Pitt. Yeah, it's been a hot minute.
I'm trying to think.
I mean, because Tampa Bay would have... I guess Tampa Bay, Dallas, technically,
yeah.
But it was in Edmonton.
It was the COVID year. But that would have been just in a normal sense.
This is going to be fun, though. I mean, Vegas obviously has been the team that's had the most consistency along with maybe Carolina, but like there's some new players in the mix. I think that's exciting for the National Hockey League and the chance to have some maybe not so well-known markets have success. I think this is going to be a fun final ride to the finish.
It is, and I think that's why we love the Stanley Cup playoffs, right? As you have, a team like Boston who, comes in guns a-blazing and, sets regular season records, and, there's no safeguard, right? You all punch the same ticket. You got to earn your ticket to the next round. And, again, Toronto, they advanced a round technically, although they wouldn't probably say that they did. Boston, again, going down. There's been some, I don't want to say surprises, right? But shall we say some interesting, how about, and the Rangers going down, right? Teams who made big moves and big pushes at the trade deadline, going all in, and just they didn't get this, the results that they wanted. So this has been fun, right? And again, for Florida, especially that franchise has been, shall we say, cursed for a while. To see them have this much success, you kind of really hope it reinvigorates that franchise. And I think we both, we give Arizona a lot of crap, but we kind of hope, I think, internally that the Tempe arena goes into play, because then in theory, if they're really going to say true to their word, right, that now they're going to get the revenue, they can start spending. And there's some decent pieces in that system where they could have a quick rise, to, shall we say, playoff stardom if they play their cards right over the next 3-4 years. I don't know, man. Like, it's possible. So
yeah, like you said, it's been a while.
Why
are you putting so much emphasis on the H? With that being said, of course, cool whip. We will be emphasizing, of course, the Stanley Cup playoffs starting round 3 in the next couple of days. Show release probably either Monday or Tuesday, maybe Wednesday morning at the latest with that recording, depending on how everything shakes out. Week after that will likely coincide with the end of the conference finals, start of the Stanley Cup final as well. Of course, men's worlds, we're going to pay attention to that. Quarterfinals begin in a week and a half on May 25th, so keep an eye on that as well. For Nick Maxon, I am Noah Grant, and we will see you soon in the den.
One-timer, come in, they score! Ripped in! A bomb from Pervix!
Dana Rasmussen fires and she scores! Dana Rasmussen for the Huskies.
Dwayne Kaprizov in for a chance to win it. He scores! Kirill the Thrill is for real! Welcome to the NHL, a game winner.
St. Cloud Cathedral is now 42.6 seconds away from wrapping up the school's first ever title.